everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of our online series. And before we get started, I just want to give you a couple of reminders. First of all, the 2025 MIT Sloan CIO Symposium will be on May 20th this year, so be sure to mark your calendar. We will have a VIP-only pre-event on the 19th as well. That'll include the CIO Leadership Award dinner, as well as a whole bunch of other networking opportunities. As I've mentioned before, this online series will eventually become live and we'll have a live audience. But for now, as we get the process up and running, we are doing it in record-only mode. So that's what we are doing today. And so with that, hi, Irving. How are you today?
Hello, Alan. I've been enjoying doing this podcast or fireside chats as I think about them, and so I'm looking forward to this one.
Well, that's good because I look forward to them as well. All right, so let me just set this up a little bit. Today, we're talking about two AI camps, the bears and the bulls, if you will, or the bulls you might call the skeptics. And I want to remind everybody that this is actually a continuation of episode 2. So you'll recall that back then, Irving and I talked about the MIT professor Darren Acemoglu, who was a co-recipient of the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics. And he was skeptical that AI will supercharge economic productivity by the end of the decade. And so in episode 2, we talked about that. The details are that Darren was interviewed by Goldman Sachs, a particular strategist named Allison Nathan, for a report. And she asked him why his views are less optimistic than other positive predictions. And he replied that the forecast differences are primarily about the timing of AI. So he's not an AI skeptic per se. He's really just talking about when and how quickly these advances are going to come forward. So in his view, it's going to take longer to get the economic impact that we're all hoping for. But nevertheless, he thinks that there will be a fundamental change in scientific discovery and business and innovation. Okay, so Irving, now that I've reminded everybody of our conversation in episode 2, and I hope people go back and listen to that, can you introduce today's topic?
Well, episode 2 was with an economist who was talking about productivity and things like that. Episode 4 has to do with much more the financial implications to investors, to people who are following the markets of AI. And I first was inspired to do this by another New York Times article I read that discussed the views of Jim Covello, who is the head of stock research at Goldman Sachs and is one of Wall Street's most respected researchers. And I guess a few months ago, he truly jolted markets with a research paper that challenged whether, when I say a research paper, I mean a stock research paper, a financial research paper that challenged whether business would see a sufficient return on their investments in AI, and that I mean ROI, return of investment, because we are spending so much money. And again, just like Acemoglu explained to Ms. Nathan, who interviewed him, that he was talking about the shorter term, so was Covello. He was really talking about the ROI people can expect in the relatively short terms, let's say 3 to 5 years, not what they can expect in the longer term. And he was also interviewed by Alison Nathan from Goldman Sachs Research, and she asked him whether the large trillion-dollar spending that Covello had referenced in his research paper will ever pay off, which is a very reasonable question. And he replied that to earn a reasonable ROI on investments, you need AI applications that would have solved highly complex and important problems that justify that level of investment. And the crucial question in his mind is, what trillion-dollar problem will AI solve, again, in the relatively near to mid-term? And he said that replacing jobs or even making jobs more productive with tremendously costly technology is actually the polar opposite of what a prior technology transition, which I'm very familiar with, like the internet, accomplished over the past 30 years.
All right. Well, so we're going to get into all that. But before we do, I just want to remind our listeners that we have 4 of your blog posts in the notes for this episode. And 2 of them are in our online community in the public square. So these are Who Will Be Proved Right, the Bullish or the Skeptic AI camps. So this is the primary post that we're discussing today. But there's 3 others. The next one is AI advances aren't likely to occur nearly as quickly as many believe. So this is the one about Darren's interview and the subject of episode number 2. But there's 2 more that actually are not in our online community because they were written by you before we created the online community. So these are the puzzling economic impact of transformative technologies, which you wrote in 2019, and then also anticipating the future by looking at the past, a blog post that you wrote way back in 2005. So I think this speaks to the fact that you have been writing about this for a very long time. So before we dig in, Irving, why don't you set this up with a little bit of historical context?
Yeah. So that blog I wrote in 2005. At the time, I was still an executive at IBM, and I had been very involved with organizing our internet strategy, and I continued to follow the internet very closely. And I was wondering, so what can we expect from the internet over time, and how long will it take? And then I discover, Carlota Perez, who is a Venezuelan economist who's been living in the UK for a long time, had been studying the historical evolution of technologies throughout the Industrial Revolution. She wrote a really good paper on that. She came to IBM and gave us a talk. And she told us that ever since the Industrial Revolution started in, let's say, the end of the 18th century, the 1780s, we have seen 5 major revolutionary technologies, transformative technologies since then. And when she analyzes, she found out that they each have a similar pattern. The technology comes out from the inventor or the laboratories later. It gets to the marketplace. Everybody gets all excited about them. The financial markets go a little bananas, investing too much on them, and then after a few years, you get a bubble, and then a couple of years later, the bubble bursts. However, just because a bubble bursts doesn't mean that people don't continue to use the technology. And over time, the technology, the advances that people had been predicting right when it first came out of the lab actually happened, and they happen much bigger than the original prediction. And she said that usually it takes several decades, maybe 3, 4, 5 decades to go from the creation of the technology to its deployment at scale in the marketplace when you get all those things. And
So Irving, that 3, 4, 5 decade, has that been shrinking as time goes on? Like, do you think it's going to be maybe a little bit shorter with AI, or you don't know?
I think it depends on the technology.
Mhm.
And especially with AI, we don't know. I think that with the internet, depending on when you start counting, it happens faster. And the reason I say depending on when you start counting is the commercial deployment of the internet only happened in the 1990s. So you could say, oh my God, look how much it's advanced over the last 20, 30 years. However, the DARPANET project that was started by the Department of Defense happened in 1969. And for 20 years, the research community had been working on the internet, deploying the internet, using the internet for their own use. Commercial applications were not allowed to use it until the very late 80s. So by that measure, it took the internet decades
Sure.
to get there.
Sure. I mean, we could say the same thing about AI. I mean, I would make an argument that maybe we start the clock when ChatGPT was released, but we all know that the research goes back 50 years before
Yeah,
that.
I would start the clock more with machine learning and deep learning because that I would say is 2010 or the 2010s.
Yeah, fair enough. So you would include like Watson winning at Jeopardy, the machines winning at chess, winning at
Yes, yes,
Go, all that kind of early stuff.
I would include those, but I would not include the early tries at AI in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or
Correct.
even 80s because they all failed.
Although it's important to note that some of the theoretical papers were written before we could realize the technology.
Yeah, that's true, but that's always true.
Always true. Okay, no, I know, but I mean, I'm just saying that, your point about where to start the stopwatch is well taken. But nevertheless, it takes a long time to roll these technologies out. All right. So let's get back to the paper. So Corvello believes that it'll take longer to reach the knee of the J curve. So this is a little bit of a nuance of the timing thing because of the large investment with AI. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Well, but and there was another thing Covello mentioned that I think was very important, that in the 90s, when the commercial deployment of the internet happened, we started getting some very, very useful applications right away. We didn't have to wait 10 or 20 years to get very useful internet applications in the 90s. What were they? Email, the ability for anyone to send email to anyone else and later text. The World Wide Web, the ability to access gazillions of information in a very simple way. And then a little bit later, electronic commerce, the ability to go online and buy whatever you want to. And Remember, the internet showed up, say, in the early 90s, and in a few years, we had those three kinds of applications that everybody could understand, that people started using. And that's why we got, in the first 10, 20 years of the internet, the explosive growth of the internet. And then don't forget, initially we said, yes, Irving, but you need a computer, you need a laptop, you need an internet connection. All that then became much, much better when smartphones showed up, because they were so much more inexpensive, and then wireless internet came in. So I would say by the 2010s, we had billions of years of people around the world accessing applications like the ones I talked about and others over the internet.
So Irving, let me just
Yes.
elaborate on what you just said. So back in the internet era, you know, we were dependent upon costs coming down, and they did come down. And if you recall, we were in the throes of Moore's law. Processors were getting cheaper. The internet, quickly became cost effective to use. But I believe that with this AI revolution, and correct me if I'm wrong, that now you have a dominant player making all the chips. Moore's law is kind of hit a plateau. It's not as clear that there's a path to cost reduction. Can you just elaborate on that part of it?
Well, I believe there will be a path to cost reductions. I think, remember,
But do you agree with these differences first?
well, the difference is it may take longer because we have invested so much, according to Covello and others. But as you remember well, because you've pointed it out to me, in the 90s, companies overinvested in deployment of fiber optics, and a number of them went bankrupt. And in fact, there were even some scandals because of that. But that overinvestment turned out to be good because we needed the fiber optics to be able to connect everybody and do all kinds of things.
True, but a point that I've made to you when I made that comment was the fiber optic technology doesn't really change over time. In other words, the cables were put in the ocean and they're still good today.
Yes.
That's not the same as deploying servers for AI, where the chips are progressing and getting more advanced.
Well, but this gets back to the argument that Daron Acemoglu made and others. People may think, oh my God, look how quickly we started using the internet. The same will be true with AI. And in fact, we are in the very early stages of this, I think of it, data-driven phase of AI. Machine learning, deep learning, and now generative AI with large language models and so on, in the very early stages. And to be honest, we're applying brute force with these gigantic data centers and these GPUs, and people are saying we need to connect the data centers to get all the electricity to nuclear power plants, and there are all kinds of things. If you ask me, Irving, do you expect us to make a lot of progress in the basic technologies, the GPUs, and there's something called tensor processing units and things like that, and in the size of the AI models that we need? Absolutely. There is no question in my mind. And the reason I have no question is because of history. This is what Carlota Perez and also our former MIT friend, Eric Brynjolfsson, have so much analyzed. And there will be progress. But, it might take a decade or two
All right,
because
well,
so
before we
many
get into
things
the
have to
decade or
happen.
two, let's just come back to the short term. What do you see as the major short-term applications for the current generation of AI?
Well, the major applications for there are two kinds of applications. There are business and consumer applications, and then let me put research applications on a different plate. There is no question in my mind that the research applications right now are the killer apps. The fact that
Well, wait, we're going to get to the killer apps, but what are the short term first?
I think the short term will be things like customer service, helping people who do customer service to be able to get information and give it out. I think programming has been a killer app, and I believe you've used AI uh, agents to help you in programming, correct?
I've used AI to help with programming. I find it very useful if I'm doing Excel spreadsheet, and
Right.
it's much easier to have the AI make a formula for Excel than it is for me to look it up in the user manual. I'll say that. That's
So
not going to set the world on fire, however, because I was able to create the formula before AI. Just took a
yeah,
little longer.
so that gets back to Covello's point that the present apps that we are all getting so excited about either are not very transformative, what our friend and colleague George Westerman calls lower T transformative. They are simple incremental advances over what existed before. And, uh, and then what we hadn't seen, which is even more important in my mind, is where are the business applications that will truly transform companies?
All right, so what is the killer app then?
Well, the the immediate killer apps, I think, where there is pretty much a consensus that AI is very useful, is in research applications, in the use of AI to, to do molecular research to help find new pharmaceuticals, in being able to develop drugs that are more tailored to an individual's particular kind of cancer and their particular genomic signatures. And those applications, remember, those are not used either by people in business or by consumers. Those are applications that are being used by researchers, and they are relying on something people in the research world have been doing forever, which is analyzing gigantic amounts of data in their research.
So would you also say that there might be tremendous advances in material science as
In materials, yeah, I should have mentioned that. All kinds of materials in material science. In fact, this morning I found an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about companies working on new enzymes that would be impossible without the technology, including bacteria equipped with novel enzymes that could digest plastic. That would be very, very important. And that is the
but
kind of stuff, or new metals that are both
but
very,
these are all so it sounds like you're saying that this technology is very good to accelerate scientific advances, and
yeah.
then the business applications will almost be a side effect of the scientific advances
Well, no, there will be business application. No, I'm saying at the moment,
at
these
the
are
moment.
at the moment, these are the big things. I am expecting, I am hoping that over time, we will get killer business applications like we have gotten in the internet. You know, e-commerce is a huge business application, and that over time we will get killer consumer applications like email and text and accessing to content on the web, but I don't think we have those yet. I
Okay,
think
so just to put this in context, I think you said to me that if I had a spreadsheet and I wanted to update it with financial information, all the rows with financial information, I could get AI to do that, but it would cost like 6 times more to run the AI than to just do it myself.
and they are not that easy to use for most people. The user interface is not, remember, the initial World Wide Web was only used by researchers, engineers, because you had to be a Unix programmer to access the data. It was when Mark Andreessen came up with the browser that the World Wide Web took off. So making those applications much easier to use is a huge part, maybe the most difficult part of the innovation. Otherwise, a small number of people will be the users.
Well, and not to mention the HTML language, which is very easy for people to use and powered the browser.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
but so let's get back to cost. Okay, you stated before that you're optimistic that costs are going to come down. So why do you think that? What's going to drive costs down?
Innovation and smaller AI models is part of the innovation. Instead of needing the kinds of gigantic models that we've been using in ChatGPT and equivalent huge models, there is a lot of research going on at universities like Stanford, for example, to have smaller open source AI models. And you could say, well, but will they be as powerful as I don't know if it's the trillion-dollar models, let me say, although they're not quite $1 trillion, the hundreds of millions of dollar models of OpenAI and so on. They may not be, but the ROI from those models might be far better. They may be good enough for the purpose, and you don't have to invest $1 trillion, and you don't need a nuclear reactor in a data center with gigantic amounts of GPU. So I am very optimistic that that will happen. If you ask me, Irving, when will that happen? I don't know the answer.
All right.
Because it's very hard to predict research.
All right. So we got about 2 minutes left, Irving. So before we go, I wanna leave on a high note. So tell
Yes.
us
By the
who
way,
is
this is a high note, the
oh,
fact that I'm very
all right. Yeah,
optimistic.
that's it. Who's bullish on AI?
Well, there are people that are bullish even on the near term. In the report that is excellent that Nathan did, she interviewed or she mentioned, for example, Joseph Briggs, who is a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, and she also wrote about some other ones who feel much more bullish that this will happen much faster than people have anticipated. So we will see. So it's not as if Covello and Acemoglu, who are, let's say, skeptics, are the only people around. There are other people who are much more bullish. And what is so important, remember, I am very bullish, but based on what I've learned from Carlota Perez's work, with Eric Brynjolfsson's work, what they said is, Irving, be patient, because throughout history, the kinds of things you are looking for requiring restructuring the companies, creating new kinds of skills, teaching them to the workforce, regulations, changes to the economy. And if you don't do those things, the
So I'm going to
technology
argue with
can,
you a little bit. You're bullish in the long term,
for sure.
but I'm not sure that you're expressing an irrational exuberance in the
No, no, I'm not expressing irrational exuberance.
So this guy Briggs, just to put a
Yes.
pin on it, right? He said that he expects U.S. productivity to go up by 9%, GDP growth by 6.1%, and ultimately automate 25% of all work tasks. That's what I recall from the report. Do you agree?
I agree that he said that, which was much higher than what Darren Acemoglu said.
Yeah, well, I was just going to point out that this guy's quite a bit more optimistic than Darren in terms of his estimate of the automation is higher than Darren. He also incorporates new task creation in his estimates, which, Darren focuses on automation of existing tasks. And also he said something that caught my eye that he sees AI advances, recent AI advances as foreshadowing the emergence of superintelligence. And in my opinion, these are pretty big assumptions. What do you
Those
think?
are very big assumptions, and I don't hear those assumptions at all from the people that I consider more, what's the right term? The people whose opinions I like better, including myself. I think that worrying about artificial general intelligence now is the equivalent of saying, this 5-year-old boy is likely to be the next Messi. You know who Messi is, the world's greatest soccer player. And I say, the boy is 5. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, but give him time to grow up a little bit more. And that's how I feel about these major things about the AI. And remember when Rodney Brooks talked to us at last year's symposium, he said that he wasn't that bullish at all on artificial general intelligence because he thought that a lot of those predictions are based on people confusing the fact that this is a machine and not a human. So they start interacting with the machine. They say, oh my God, this is incredible. And then all of a sudden they start ascribing to the machine the qualities that they would ascribe to a human, and they forget that it's a machine, it's not a human. So
Irving, it doesn't sound like you're a candidate for getting an AI girlfriend anytime soon.
not at, first of all, I'm married, been married for decades, and I don't think I'm anywhere near that.
We'll reassure your wife.
Yes. And
All
at
right.
my age, getting an AI girlfriend would be sort of not right.
Not right. Okay. Well, with that, Irving, we're just a few minutes over time. So I'm going to say to the audience, thank you very much for joining us for episode 4 of our online series. You can watch this in our online community, and you can also read all of Irving's blogs, except for the ones that are really old. But you can Google his blog post for that. So thanks a lot. Have a nice day. We will see you.